I'm sure there are things I could do better. I'm sure there are things I could have said better.
After her latest interview, Joni Lamb's reaction was explosive. Fans and critics alike are equally opposed to her, questioning her contradictory statements and actions. What was supposed to be a routine chat quickly turned into a storm of public outrage. The intense response shocked even the singer's most loyal fans. So, what exactly went wrong in Joni Lamb's latest appearance? And why has her image become so popular? The answers will shock you. Joni Lamb's recent interview was supposed to be her big moment to repair her public image, to finally take control of the narrative that had been spiraling out of her hands for months. The interview, carefully titled "The Real Joni Lamb," promised viewers a deeper look into her life, a chance to reveal who she really was behind all the headlines. From the very beginning, it was clear that Joni was not just sitting down for a casual conversation. This was a calculated effort, a chance to present herself in a new light, to fix the broken pieces of her reputation. She came into the interview poised and composed, as if ready to share her journey with the world. Joni began by discussing her childhood, talking about how she had always been guided by her faith. She painted a picture of a young woman who had always felt God's hand in her life, someone who had found strength and purpose through her belief. She shared a personal story from her teenage years about a relationship that she described as a turning point in her life, one where she turned to God for guidance. This was a familiar story for many people of faith, a story about divine intervention and finding purpose through God's will. It was a narrative that painted her as a person who had always been obedient, someone who had lived a life shaped by faith and divine direction. However, as the interview went on, it became clear that Joni was trying to do more than just share her personal story. She wasn't simply reflecting on her life, she was crafting an image. She was positioning herself as a woman of faith who had overcome adversity, someone who had faced hardships and emerged stronger. Her words were carefully chosen, her emotions carefully controlled. She was building a narrative, one where she was the victim of circumstances, where everything she had done was part of a greater plan. But this careful narrative building didn't sit well with everyone. Viewers began to see through the polished image she was trying to project. It became clear that Joni was attempting to shape the way people saw her, to control the narrative rather than open up and allow the audience to see the real her. Her attempts to present herself as a woman of faith who had been tested and come out on top felt more like a rehearsed performance than a genuine reflection on her life. The deeper the conversation went, the more it became apparent that Joni was not truly addressing the most pressing issues about her life. Instead, she was focused on shaping the story to fit her desired image, one that would shield her from the controversies surrounding her. Joni Lamb's emotional breakdown during her recent interview was a pivotal moment, but it wasn't as genuine as many hoped. From the start, Joni tried to project an image of strength, portraying herself as a woman of deep faith who had been through trials and come out stronger. But as the interview went on, it became clear that her emotional outpouring was not entirely about the grief she claimed to feel, but more about how she wanted to be seen by the public. It felt as though her tears weren't about the pain of losing her husband, Marcus Lamb, but more about trying to repair her broken public image. Instead of giving the audience a raw, honest look at her grief, it was almost as if Joni was performing. The interview started with Joni speaking about the deep sorrow she felt after Marcus's passing. But something didn't sit right. She talked about how hard it was, how she had felt lost without him, and how her faith was the only thing that kept her going. This narrative seemed comforting, almost too comforting. The pain she spoke of didn't match the actions that followed. Her quick remarriage to Doug Weiss just months after Marcus's death raised suspicions. How could someone who claimed to have been grieving so deeply turn around and marry someone else so quickly? The timeline just didn't add up. According to her, she had spent 6 months in mourning, yet she was already planning a honeymoon with Doug, someone she had known for years but had only recently become romantically involved with. When questioned about the timing, Joni tried to frame it as part of God's plan. She claimed that it was part of her divine journey, that moving on quickly was a part of God's will. But this didn't sit well with many viewers. How could her grief be so neatly packaged into a story of divine timing? The more she tried to explain herself, the more disconnected she seemed from the reality of the situation. It was almost as though she was trying to justify her actions with faith, using religion as a shield to deflect the questions and concerns that everyone had. And then there were her tears. Joni cried as she spoke about Marcus, but those tears felt scripted. They didn't seem like the natural outpouring of grief. Instead, it felt like a performance, a well-rehearsed act aimed at pulling on the heartstrings of her audience. She was trying to portray herself as a woman who had suffered, as if that would explain everything. As if her emotions alone could justify her action. But the tears didn't match the reality that viewers saw. The timeline of her remarriage, the honeymoon plans, all of it contradicted the grieving widow Joni was trying to paint herself as. Viewers were quick to pick up on the contradictions. How could someone who had allegedly been so devastated by her husband's death move on so quickly? Was her grief genuine, or was it just another part of the carefully crafted narrative she was trying to sell? The more Joni spoke, the more questions arose. There was a clear disconnect between her words and her actions, and the emotional manipulation became apparent. It was as if she was using her grief, her emotions, as a tool to garner sympathy, but in doing so, she only alienated people further. As the interview continued, it became even clearer that Joni wasn't fully engaging with the hard truths. She spoke about her faith, her challenges, and the struggles she had faced, but she avoided any real discussion of the allegations that had been swirling around her. The focus was always on her personal narrative, on how she had overcome adversity and remained strong. But the issues that really mattered, the allegations of financial misconduct, the cover-up accusations, the criticism surrounding her remarriage, were brushed aside. Instead of taking responsibility for these things, Joni chose to focus on her own story. As if it could overshadow the real issues, her emotional manipulation didn't stop there. When asked about the leaked audio recordings of her son, Joni Lamb, Joni completely dismissed them. She claimed she hadn't watched any of the podcasts or YouTube videos that had been circulating. "I haven't watched one podcast," she said, almost dismissively, as if the whole thing was beneath her. But viewers were quick to point out the contradiction. How could she not be aware of the videos when her own team had been involved in creating response content to these very videos? It was a glaring contradiction, and it only added to the sense that Joni was trying to present herself as above the drama, while still controlling the narrative behind the scenes. Instead of addressing the accusations directly, Joni deflected. She painted herself as a victim of lies and half-truths, someone who had been misunderstood and misrepresented. But this approach didn't make her more relatable. It made her seem distant, as if she was living in a different reality. The more she talked, the more her audience could see through the carefully crafted image she was trying to project. The disconnect between her personal narrative and the reality of the situation only deepened, and her attempts to manipulate the public's perception only backfired. As the interview came to an end, Joni had failed to repair her image. Instead of winning over her critics, she had alienated even more people by refusing to address the serious allegations against her and the network. Her focus on her personal journey, her faith, and her own story left viewers frustrated. They wanted answers. They wanted her to be honest, to confront the real issues. But instead, she gave them a polished narrative, full of contradictions and emotional manipulation. The interview was meant to be a moment of redemption, but instead, it became just another chapter in a public relations disaster. The more Joni tried to present herself as a victim, the more disconnected she seemed from the reality of the situation. Her emotional breakdown, her carefully crafted narrative, and her refusal to address the tough questions all pointed to the same conclusion. Joni Lamb was more concerned with controlling her public image than with confronting the real issues that had caused the public outcry in the first place. And in the end, this emotional manipulation only made things worse. Joni Lamb's interview was meant to be a turning point, a chance to rebuild her image after a series of scandals and controversies that had tarnished her reputation. But as the conversation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Joni wasn't interested in addressing the serious allegations against her. Instead of confronting the tough questions head-on, she spent most of her time deflecting responsibility, avoiding the real issues, and focusing on a polished narrative that seemed disconnected from the reality many viewers were seeing. One of the biggest issues that viewers had with the interview was Joni's reluctance to take responsibility for the controversies surrounding her and Dayar. She was asked multiple times about the financial misconduct allegations, the cover-up claims, and the troubling issues surrounding her remarriage to Doug Weiss, but each time she danced around the questions. Rather than giving direct answers, Joni continually deflected, insisting that the allegations were part of a smear campaign. She claimed that everything being said about her was false and baseless, accusing those behind the claims of attempting to tear her down. This kind of deflection didn't sit well with the audience. Viewers wanted Joni to own up to her actions, to acknowledge the issues that had caused so much pain and frustration for those who had once supported her. Instead, she painted herself as the victim of malicious lies, completely ignoring the fact that the allegations were serious and, in some cases, backed up by evidence. Joni's refusal to engage with these issues made it feel as if she was trying to manipulate the conversation, shifting the focus away from the real problems and towards a self-crafted narrative of victimhood. One of the most glaring examples of Joni avoiding accountability was her handling of the leaked audio recordings from her son, Joni Lamb. These recordings had painted a troubling picture of Jonathan's actions, revealing a side of her that many had never seen before. In the recordings, Jonathan accused Joni of manipulative behavior and of trying to control the family's narrative in a way that served her own interests. But instead of addressing these serious allegations directly, Joni dismissed them with an almost dismissive attitude. She claimed that she hadn't listened to any of the podcasts or YouTube videos discussing the recordings, as if ignoring the issue would make it go away. This response was deeply troubling for many viewers. If Joni truly hadn't listened to the recordings or followed the public reaction, how could she possibly understand the gravity of the situation? Her dismissive attitude only added to the growing sense that she was out of touch with reality, that she was more interested in protecting her image than in addressing the real concerns that had been raised. The fact that her team had been involved in creating response videos to these same YouTube videos made Joni's claims even harder to believe. How could she claim ignorance when her own team was actively engaging with the controversy? It felt like a contradiction, and the more she insisted on not being involved, the more her credibility suffered. Joni's refusal to engage with the specifics of the allegations surrounding Dayar was another area where she completely avoided accountability. The network had been under intense scrutiny for financial mismanagement, and there were numerous claims that funds had been misused and funneled into personal expenses. One of the most shocking allegations was that Joni had used ministry funds to pay for her honeymoon with Doug Weiss, just months after Marcus's death. When asked about this, Joni denied the allegations outright, claiming that she had paid for the trip out of her own pocket. But the timing of the honeymoon, so soon after Marcus's death, raised serious questions. How could someone who had claimed to be grieving so deeply turn around and plan a romantic getaway with her new husband? Joni's defensive tone throughout the interview only made things worse. Instead of offering a clear and honest explanation of the financial allegations, she continued to claim that they were part of a larger conspiracy to discredit her and Dayar. She tried to paint herself as a target of a smear campaign, but in doing so, she ignored the real issues at hand. Viewers were frustrated because they felt that Joni wasn't being transparent. She wasn't addressing the details of the allegations. She was simply deflecting and trying to change the narrative to fit her desired image. The lack of accountability was also evident in Joni's handling of her remarriage to Doug Weiss. After Marcus's death, Joni quickly moved on, marrying Doug just months later. This raised eyebrows, especially given the deep connection Joni had described having with Marcus. How could she have moved on so quickly after such a significant loss? When asked about the timing of her remarriage, Joni didn't give a clear answer. Instead, she used the same excuse she had used for everything else. It was part of God's plan. She claimed that moving on so quickly was part of her divine journey, but viewers weren't convinced. The timing just didn't add up. It seemed like Joni was trying to cover up the uncomfortable truth by framing it as part of a larger spiritual journey. But her explanation didn't ring true. Joni also failed to acknowledge the broader context of her remarriage. The quick turnaround between mourning her husband and marrying someone else raised serious questions about her grief. She had claimed to have been devastated by Marcus's death, yet her actions didn't seem to match her words. Instead of addressing this contradiction, Joni deflected, framing her remarriage as part of God's will and not something that should be questioned. Her refusal to confront the reality of the situation left viewers feeling unsatisfied. They wanted answers, not rehearsed lines about divine plans and spiritual journeys. Perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the interview was Joni's attitude toward the criticisms she faced. Instead of offering a genuine apology or attempting to explain her actions, she chose to dismiss the concerns of her audience. She called the allegations lies and half-truths, accusing people of trying to tear her down. This defensive posture only deepened the sense that Joni was more concerned with protecting her image than with acknowledging the real issues that had caused so much controversy. By refusing to engage with the serious questions and instead focusing on defending herself, she alienated even more viewers. As the interview came to a close, it was clear that Joni had failed to repair her image. Rather than addressing the tough questions head-on, and offering a transparent explanation, she had deflected, dismissed, and avoided accountability. Her refusal to engage with the real issues left many viewers feeling frustrated, angry, and disappointed. Joni had been given a chance to redeem herself, but instead of seizing that opportunity, she squandered it by sticking to a rehearsed narrative that only deepened the divide between her and her audience. In the end, Joni Lamb's interview wasn't a moment of redemption. It was a moment of missed opportunity. She had a chance to face the allegations, to take responsibility for her actions, and to offer some clarity to her supporters. Instead, she chose to deflect, to avoid accountability, and to continue spinning the same story she had told for months. The result was predictable. The controversy surrounding her only grew, and the questions about her integrity remained unanswered. The fallout from Joni Lamb's interview was swift and unforgiving. What was meant to be a moment of redemption for her instead turned into a public relations nightmare, deepening the distrust and frustration already felt by many viewers. As the interview unfolded, it became clear that Joni's attempts to reshape her image were only making things worse. The backlash was immediate, and the public disappointment was palpable. Instead of gaining sympathy or understanding, Joni found herself further alienated from the very audience she had hoped to win back. From the very beginning, viewers had high expectations. They wanted answers, clarity, and most importantly, accountability. Joni's interview was billed as a chance for her to come clean, to address the serious issues surrounding her personal life, the DR network, and the many allegations that had been swirling for months. But instead of providing those answers, Joni's performance felt like an attempt to cover up the truth. She carefully crafted her narrative, painting herself as a woman of faith who had weathered many storms. But she failed to address the most pressing questions. The more she spoke, the more it seemed like she was hiding something, like she was more interested in controlling the narrative than in being honest. The public response was quick and brutal. Comments on social media flooded in, many of them condemning Joni for her refusal to address the real issues at hand. Viewers were disappointed by her inability to take responsibility for the allegations against her and the DR network. Instead of owning up to the financial mismanagement, the cover-up accusations, and the controversy surrounding her remarriage, Joni deflected. She'd painted herself as a victim, a woman who had been misunderstood. But this narrative didn't resonate with the public. The viewers saw through the facade, and the more Joni tried to present herself as the victim, the more they began to question her integrity. One of the most glaring aspects of the backlash was Joni's handling of the allegations about her remarriage. She had been married to Marcus Lamb for decades, and his death had been a significant event not only in her personal life, but also for the DR network. However, just months after Marcus's passing, Joni remarried Doug Weiss. This quick turnaround raised eyebrows, especially considering the deep connection Joni had described with Marcus. Many viewers felt that she had moved on too quickly, and instead of addressing this issue directly, Joni continued to use the excuse of God's plan to justify her actions. This only frustrated the audience further. The timing of her remarriage didn't match the narrative she was trying to sell, and viewers couldn't shake the feeling that Joni was trying to manipulate the situation to fit her desired image. Joni's emotional breakdown during the interview, which was supposed to be a moment of catharsis, only added to the public's frustration. Her tears, which she had hoped would convey genuine grief, came across as scripted and insincere. It seemed as if Joni was using her emotions as a tool to gain sympathy, but the viewers didn't buy it. The more she cried, the more they questioned whether her grief was real or just another attempt to salvage her image. Her emotional manipulation felt calculated, as if she was playing a role rather than genuinely expressing her pain. This only deepened the divide between Joni and her audience, as many felt that she was more interested in playing the part of the grieving widow than in facing the real issues. As the interview continued, Joni's deflections became more obvious. When asked about the leaked audio recordings of her son, Jonathan Lamb, which painted a troubling picture of Jonathan's actions, she claimed she hadn't watched any of the videos or listened to the podcasts discussing the recordings. This response only served to alienate her further. How could she not be aware of the controversy surrounding her family, especially when her team was actively involved in making response videos to the very same recordings? Joni's denial felt like a contradiction, and viewers were quick to call her out on it. How could she claim to be above the drama, yet still be controlling the narrative behind the scenes? This blatant deflection only fueled the suspicion that Joni was hiding something, that she was more interested in preserving her image than in facing the reality of the situation. The lack of accountability was another major point of contention. Joni had the perfect opportunity to confront the allegations head-on, to acknowledge the concerns raised by the public and to offer an explanation. But instead of doing that, she continued to deny everything. She dismissed the accusations as lies and half-truths, refusing to take any responsibility for the controversies surrounding her. The public wanted answers, not excuses, but Joni failed to provide them. This only made people more frustrated. The more she denied, the more they began to question her sincerity. How could someone who had been in the public eye for so long continue to deny everything, refusing to acknowledge the gravity of the situation? The fallout was particularly severe in the aftermath of the interview. Social media exploded with criticism, with many people expressing their disappointment at Joni's handling of the situation. The comments section was flooded with accusations of dishonesty and manipulation. Viewers pointed out the glaring contradictions in Joni's story, highlighting the inconsistencies in her timeline and the evasive answers she gave to tough questions. Many expressed their frustration at how she had handled the entire interview, accusing her of using the platform to spin a tale of personal triumph instead of confronting the real issues.